You can make something really bad very fast and everybody celebrates it. When we make a decision, we are in fact designing. And if we are making that decision without considering the human being, then that's a poor decision. What kind of idiot does that and then does it again and then does it again? Well, it turns out most people. So, hello, I'm Clive Grinyer. I'm the author of a recently published book called Redesigning Thinking. Redesigning Thinking is about how we can embrace the techniques and tools of design. And it comes from my current occupation, which is an executive educator, trainer in service design. I started life as a designer, a product designer, became a digital designer, and eventually led service design teams in places like banks and ran the service design course at the Royal College of Art until a couple of years ago when I left to write my book.
Now, Clive, thank you so much for joining us on the Forward podcast. It is absolutely brilliant to have you.
My great pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
It feels almost poetic to have you as a guest to close out this season of the Forward podcast. This season has been all about rethinking, spending a bit more time in the problem space without jumping to solutions, and speaking with people who are driven more so by curiosity rather than comfort. And all of this is so beautifully reflected, not in just what you do, who you are as a person, but in your brand new book, Redesigning Thinking, How Service Design is Solving Our 21st Century Challenges. There it is. For anyone watching on video, it's just made a little segue across the screen. And if you look into the background, it has been strategically placed on that beautiful bookshelf behind you, Clive. It's brilliant. And today we're going to talk a little bit about why you wrote that book, what it means, and why it matters not just to people working in design, but anyone who's a human, really, trying to make their way in this life, trying to make the world a little bit better. So to kick us off, I asked this question of all of my guests. To help our listeners get to know you that little bit better, would you mind telling us what drives you forward, both in your life and your career?
Big question to kick off with. Okay. I think it's very much what drives me forward in life. But the book actually covers a little bit of how I discovered design, and the mystery of how the world is formed around us kind of fascinated me from then on. And this idea that we actually do have agency in the world, we just don't realize it, and that there's a whole lot of people called designers, and above that, leaders, managers, people in business, people in government, who make momentous decisions that have an impact on us. So I was lucky to sort of discover that, if you like, quite early on and become fascinated by that. I remember at sort of 16 or so, wanting to do something in the public domain that made people sort of happy and comfortable in their lives. And the only thing I could think of at the time was to paint murals in town centres that would cheer people up. That was the only sort of public art I was aware of. Very luckily, surprisingly good careers advisor came into the art department in my sixth form college down in the New Forest in Hampshire and said, "Sounds to me like you should be a product designer," which of course I'd never heard of. But then this idea of the products around us that were shaped and formed that had been of interest to me since quite a young child. I mean, lots of designers will tell you they take toys apart when they're young and try and work out how they're made. You know, that's a bit of a clue. They're probably going to be designers or engineers or something. So that was very much me as well. But to realize there was a route into a career like that, I thought was absolutely fascinating. Interestingly and coincidentally, the local clergyman came round and suggested I have a career in the church. I shouldn't laugh. I realized at that point that my faith, if you like, was actually in how the world was formed and what I came to know as design. And I think that's pretty much what I've become, actually.
Wow.
I know, it's incredible, isn't it? I love evangelizing about design. I like explaining it, especially to non-designers, and helping people, hence the book, embrace some of the ways we can make better decisions that don't have such unfortunate consequences for people.
Yes, yes. I love that there was 2 paths going down for you, and I when you mentioned being 16 and looking at how you could cheer people up with those murals, when I started reading the start of your book, I could see that curiosity probably started much earlier on because you start out by talking about this wonderful childlike curiosity that you had with your grandmother's dress shop and wondering what was happening when they'd go to London to see all these trends, these fashion trends, and questioning of that. I want to know if you could tell us a little bit more about that epiphany that that time brought you and the path that that brought you down as well.
Yes, over the years, I've realized that was an incredibly formative experience. And I'll explain to everybody that my grandmother, well, originally she ran hotels in Bournemouth. And there are a lot of hotels in Bournemouth, but she then, when I was about 7 or so, she changed and bought a dress shop in a little tiny village in the New Forest called Brockenhurst. And it was actually quite a surprisingly swanky dress shop. She had some really great clothes there. And I used to remember she would put magazines on the floor of the window, which would have a dress in, and it would be Vogue or Harper's Bazaar, one of these fashion magazines. And you'd look up, and there was the dress. Wow, you know. And I had the job as a 7-year-old to lay out the magazines, sort of thing, and see her dressing the mannequins. But then, as you say, they would go every 6 months or so to London, which was a big deal, get on the train, get themselves all made up, look lovely. My mum and her mum, my grandmother. And then they would return with bags and magazines and brochures and announce that next summer everything was going to be sky blue or yellow or something. And I was just completely perplexed by this. What kind of Wizard of Oz is there? What magical oracle do they go and see? You know, is there dry ice and something appears? So it really set my imagination racing, and slowly began to understand that, you know, they started to talk about designers and brands and what they
Mm,
stood for. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. There are humans making these decisions, and that really started to pique my curiosity, as you rightly
mm,
put it. There's another aspect to this as well that I found very formative, which was the whole theatre performance of the shop. Um, she would be pampered by my grandfather in the mornings, like a sort of almost like a prize fighter, and she would come down the stairs into the shop at 10 o'clock. She was quite lazy. She liked her lions, and there would literally
love
be a
it.
queue of people outside, and she would open her doors and they would come in, and she would reinvent their identities through clothing. And she would say, well, if you like this, you know, do you like this? I mean, she was a precursor to Amazon, I tell you. And it was just the whole theatre. And luckily I was young enough that I was sort of allowed to be around. You know, if I'd
Yeah.
been a surly teenager, I'd have been kicked out, and was. But to sort of experience this going on, and then also realize that this service she was giving and the products she was buying. And one of the weirdest jobs I used to have was to wrap empty boxes at Christmas to make it look like there were lots of presents in the window. But I knew they were all empty. I
Oh
found this
my
very
god.
strange to pack an empty box, but it was all part of this theatre. It was all part of this service. And in later years, I realised how formative that was, and that,
Yeah.
you know, that really led me to realise design and this orchestration of life actually is something that gets done. And I wanted to be part of it to make sure it was done well.
So, so beautiful. And when you talk there as well, I'm thinking of in my mind, the mention of Amazon and all of these things, the trends, it's all things that we still have today, but packaged and delivered differently. You might like this and that custom design for individuals. And talking when we'll talk a little bit more about that human centered approach to design. It's quite interesting how all of those things still follow through to today. And I love that idea of the service design in that way is of being service to others, which I'd love to talk to you now about because you've spoken about this way to think more humanly, to create better business, to navigate through complex systems, to make things work. There's a way to do it, and it's called design. Across your career, I'm sure you've seen so many different ways that design has been defined, even from 7 years old to 16, looking at murals to now. So, what definition of design would you give to this through the lens of service design?
Yes, great question. So, just yesterday, I was talking to somebody and they said, oh, some famous design manager has 23 different definitions of design. And I had a sort of flashback to my whole career in a way, because people have always said, yes, but what is design? And of course, it can be many things. It can be many disciplines, of course. There's many types of design. There's the perception of design as being very much perhaps about fashion,
Mm.
about luxury, about interior design, landscape design. It's just everywhere, but it's seen as perhaps a conscious, luxurious act. And then, as I say, there's product design, user interface design, all these different craft-based skills, if you can call it that. And
Mm.
that's all there. That's all absolutely true. But over time, I've sort of converted my definition of design to be one simple big one, right? And in a sense, again, that's what the book is arguing for. That actually, when we make a decision, we are in fact designing. And if we are making that decision without considering the human being, then that's a poor decision. Now that needs a little bit of unpacking and a little bit of explanation, um, because we live in a world where we care a lot about the planet, for example, and even beyond humanity, how are we treating the wider world of nature, and that's absolutely true and excellent. But there's still an awful lot of people in the world who aren't treated with equity or fairly. Human beings are making poor decisions right across the board, businesses to governments, and they're making their decisions on the basis of very internal, myopic, organizational, business, technology based ways. And for me, it's about redressing the balance, creating the triage of course, we need organizational capability to make a business or an organization or even a public body. Um, but if we don't balance that with our understanding of humanity, we open ourselves up to failure and poor consequences, and that's what we see all around the world, frankly. So my plea and argument is is to understand that human, whether they're a customer and we want to create value for them so that they buy our products, whether a government we want to benignly change behavior, help people achieve their goals better. And I think there are great examples of all those things in business and government, but mostly terrible examples, some of which are in the book. and and it for me it seems a no-brainer. I've just been absolutely amazed through my career how leaders, how managers, how people, how technology developers refuse to consider humanity first, to consider the needs of customers. And yet there are so many opportunities for innovation, for actually optimizing what you do to fit the needs of people and not do the myriad of other features that you want to provide people, but they don't need or want themselves. We seem to be very reticent, very reluctant to start with the people we are actually aiming our products and services at. So for me, that's where service design is a very, I hesitate to use the word holistic, but it is a very sort of over looking at a whole experience through time, of which there will be many touch points from adverts to apps to customer service and all the rest. And unless we design those, they are accidental and they often don't work. And that's really where I'm coming from a service design perspective.
And you've given me this perfect opportunity to skip to a question that I wanted to ask you later on, but I'm going to use this time now because you talk about humanity, and we've spoken a lot about design thinking, service design, all being centered around human centered design. But this way of thinking, the humanity centered design. You've mentioned this before, and it's brought through another project that you've launched, which was Project Love. I'm wondering if you can link that back to this idea as well.
Well, thank you for knowing about that. Yes, Project Love was and is and will become still a really fascinating and important part of my life. But as I was ending my time at the Royal College of Art running the service design course there, I was approached by an American institute, philanthropic institute, who were interested in design and how it could um, create tangible actions that would help us love each other. Now, love is a very powerful, tainted word, lots of different perceptions about that. Um, but I was really interested in this. We just before that had a potential project looking at whether you could design for happiness. We kind of decided you couldn't, but you might be able to remove unhappiness. Okay, like things not working, for example, make you unhappy and frustrated. But when it came to love, I thought this is really interesting. And I always love the foggier and fuzzier the topic, the more I'm interested in it. And so we did. We put together a collection of about 16 designers, most of them recent graduates from the course I ran at the Royal College of Art. And we went on a year-long exploration of whether we could design things. And we defined love in a number of different ways. That was quite important. Certainly, love of yourself. I worked with a wonderful writer, philosopher called Mark Vernon, who, when I said to him, "Do we start with love for ourselves?" He said, "Well, as Aristotle said, we cannot befriend another if we not befriend ourselves." I thought, wow, that's great. Keep going. So we came up with wonderful philosophical statements as we went through a spectrum, I suppose, of love, of course, including relational love, the love perhaps in the way we expect it to be. And interestingly, that was the aspect of love we didn't focus on as much, though we may well in the future. And one of my students, Ali Mejun Calder, has created a wonderful app called Lovewick, which is about nurturing and tending our love for each other, which has been really successful actually. So there are examples of design for relational love, but we looked at communities, we looked at society, we looked at nature, we looked at spiritualism, looked at a whole load of things, and created 16 prototypes, visualizations from park benches that encourage conversation to prevent loneliness, from a kind AI app that monitors your emails and social media and gives you a score and gives you tips on how to be kinder. And it was really about empathy and tolerance in the end. It was about how can we help people get on. And there are lots of opportunities that have come out of that project. And we're looking to relaunch it in the next few months and invite another set of designers. One of the wonderful things about the project was that people really learnt a lot about how you could tangibly encourage people to get on better with each other. But they also discovered design in a way that was meaningful. As I said earlier, design has many perceptions and some of them are quite not helpful. But when you see we've designed this to encourage love, there was a lovely resonance there that was really encouraging, and it's had a fantastic impact. So yes, we want to continue with Project Love.
It's beautiful because it's looking at some of the maybe the invisible things that we wouldn't even think second guess or second think, and love in itself, that very concept of it, and the relational love, the self-love, all of it are these invisible threads I see in our world that we don't actually question much. And that takes me back then to thinking about how you speak about design being something for everyone, in a way that it can be used across anything and everything and all in between, as this potential problem solving tool to help make better decisions day to day. And going from love to then going at more of a negative space, I would say, but looking at then that in terms of bad decision making that you've mentioned, what would you say are some of the most outdated assumptions then in businesses that still dictate decision making today? And maybe this is the call to arms for this book that you've just released.
Yes, you're right. I mean, that's why I called it redesigning thinking, because I think it's the way we think, the way we approach problems is very old fashioned, exactly as you describe it. I think I have to blame our education system, our expectations and understanding of what a leader is are quite old fashioned, and
Mm.
times have changed very rapidly. Um, if there's two or three things I'd really focus on, um, it's the desire for people to imagine a solution very quickly and to then develop that solution and believe it is the right thing to do to go fast. We live in a world of agile methodology. And agile is measured by velocity of progress, not whether what you're making is right.
Mhm.
And that's a fundamental problem. You can make something really bad very fast and everybody celebrates it. And it goes back to my time at the Design Council and the development by the team we put together at the Design Council that, after I'd left, created what we call the Double Diamond, which is a very simple explanation of the design framework that really has a lot of impact on people. But it all came from this idea that people were seeing a problem, immediately deciding what the solution was, and seeing that as the right thing to do, and then developing that solution very quickly, and then being quite puzzled, surprised, and often badly affected by the fact that that solution didn't fit the people who had the problem, and actually that wasn't the problem. And this was research with hundreds and thousands of different companies and people who were developing ideas. And for me, it was very intuitive. I've seen everybody go, "Oh yes, I'm clever. I know what the problem is. I can solve it. Move away. Let me through." you know,
Yeah.
that school of leadership. I've seen it from CEOs. I've seen it in product managers, and it's a very expensive method of thinking because the failure rate is incredibly high.
Mm.
And every time I talk about this, when I'm training businesses on apprenticeship schemes through my own company, um, people say, "Oh yeah, we just finished a 2-year development program, and when we launched it, it was nobody wanted it, and it didn't work, and we had to spend 6 months with 6 full-time developers changing it all." What kind of idiot does that and then does it again and then does it again? Well, turns out most people. And I just don't understand it. The trouble is, we have to invest a bit of time, and it's not that much time, looking at our data, talking to customers, persuading people to talk to customers is almost impossible. And yet, the
Mm.
difference, the magic that happens when you do that, will completely turbocharge your business or your policy and make it more effective. But my role in life, it appears, is to persuade people to stop solutionizing and just go and find out what that problem is. And if I do that in only a few occasions, my work will be done.
Job well done. And it is that idea that because it's everywhere, the time, the limitations of time and the going against giving more time to doing things well and spending more time in that problem space. And when you talk about that, it makes me think of the rigidness of the status quo. And you've mentioned this before, is sometimes it can feel easier and cheaper for leaders to stick to. Even the sense of a leader coming in and saying, I've got this, move aside, that in itself is very much so probably outdated thinking. And I would love to ask you, what are the long term costs then of this sticking to the status quo and that agility, that buzzword that we hear so much and people celebrate a lot, but really, is it actually doing more harm than good?
I mean, there are aspects of agile that we steal and are really useful. I mean, there's a culture around agile of openness and sharing and learning, and having a daily stand up or whatever it is, and the sprint methodology. I use all of those, but in design. And it's even agile talks about phase zero, about if you're properly agile, you go and do what I'm encouraging people to do. But most people don't see that bit. They just set up a load of teams and they start counting use cases, and off they go. And you end up with a mess, and you end up with stuff that doesn't work. And nobody ever says, does anyone want it? Right. When I started at Barclays, there was something like 12 work streams on a major project. And absolutely none of those work streams knew what the other people were doing, but they were going agile and they were going fast. So yes, to answer your question, I think I think there's a lot of fear in leaders, and and their stakeholders tend to be the economic and financial people standing next to them, the people who are looking for returns. The UK is especially famous for being quite short-termist in its focus, which is crippling, crucifying. And but right now, there's some really interesting things that are going to really challenge that way of doing things. Um, Off the top of my head, two or three of them. Gen Z, the people you are employing now, are sort of demanding a sense of purpose in their life. I love that. you know, don't work for the baddies or make the baddies goodies. That's coming through. And in a world where climate change is not just a disputed thing anymore, but a legislative requirement. We struggle with that word. There's legislation out there, you've got to do it. And it's working. And the wonderful thing about that is people are learning how to make profit from sustainability and aligning that with rising consumer expectations. Certainly, your reputation can be destroyed if you don't take care of the planet, even if you can argue that some people aren't always making the purchasing decisions you'd like them to make. But the force is there. And then, of course, AI is coming along. And like everything, we're already seeing companies who fired all their staff, turned on AI, found it didn't work, had to rehire. I'm not saying AI does not work. AI is incredibly interesting and it's helping us do a lot of things. One of the encouraging things I saw in the World Economic Forum report of a few months ago was that number 4 on the list of desirable attributes in workforce and employees is creativity, problem solving. Exactly. We need to identify those problems. We hopefully will have more time to do that with AI. AI tech was something like 20 on the list. you know. So this is the time for creativity, actually. And one of the things I love working with companies is helping people remove their self-repression, frankly, and work together, collaborate together to start solving some of the big problems of a business or policy or an organization, because everyone's too busy in meetings and doing not that important a job that AI can take away. And perhaps we can sit back, be creative, and be differentiated and be innovative. And I really do. Perhaps I'm stupidly optimistic, but I am optimistic that if we understand that, we will have better organizations that will thrive. But it will be a transition phase. But those pressures mean we have to do something now.
That's beautiful. The idea of that time that we spoke about earlier, that being brought back into an organization and giving more time then for this focus on problems, which is really exciting. I don't think you're overly optimistic. I think that's wonderful to hear. And when we look at then anyone listening who may be in an organization that is stuck in that siloed cycle of thinking and trying to move fast through problems, what is a piece of advice that you would give to them that they could enact today to better bring design into their way of thinking?
Well, obviously by the book, obviously. At
Yes,
the end
of
of each
course.
chapter.
That's a non-negotiable, everybody. I'm going to be putting that link into the comment into the description of this episode as well.
Wonderful. At the end of each chapter, because I'm very aware that the book is actually written, there will be lots of people who perhaps want to be service designers, who are service designers, who are designers, but it's obviously trying to bridge a gap to people who are not designers. Um, and at the end of most chapters, I say, if you're a normal person, if you're not a designer, if you want to just redesign your thinking, here's a new thought, like go and talk to your customers, for example, stop solutionizing. If you want to be a designer, here's how to frame your skills. Here's how to develop skills that will be really useful to that business or organization you're working for. And so hopefully those two points of view will help people understand where we're going. But I think if it's really, really fundamental, uh, I think people do see design teams as very much at the end of the process. And yet the real value in design, I think, is way more strategic than that. If you have an idea, mock it up, ask a designer to make it look real. I think, researching your customers, number one, but prototyping is one of the most brilliantly simple ideas in design, that you make something before you make it. Sorry, you vision something before you make it. You visualize something, and and you can then touch it, feel it, imagine it, experience it. Actually, And I have, examples where you put a post-it on a phone and immediately it looks like an app, where you have cardboard boxes and it can be a bank or a hospital. You can do things very simply to understand whether they're good or not. But people tend not to do that. People tend to build things and then find out that they don't work or they're not what people wanted. And it's such a fundamental, if this process was called anything other than design, they would teach it at business school. But because it's called design, it's a struggle. The perception is difficult to overcome, but these are very, very simple tools that will save you millions, if not billions, find you competitive differentiation, make your policy have greater impact faster. And there, of course, there are people in government, people in businesses who are doing this. And I think a lot of people have said the time is right, because the things I'm talking about are, the perception of it is going up in many companies. At the same time, I hesitate to name them, but some pretty big management consultants are firing all their designers. Some pretty big fossil fuel companies are firing all their designers. Shame on them. They will pay for that. Honestly, they will. And and I think that's just blindingly stupid. And you don't need many designers to have a big impact. A team of 20 designers will completely reframe everything you do, create new business models, create happy customers, and have a massively positive effect. Some people are getting it, some people are not. So we'll see who wins in the end.
Yeah, we'll see. We should have a leaderboard for this, honestly. And when you're talking there, I'm even thinking of the ripple effect that those designers can have in an organization in just bringing a simple awareness to a way of looking at something differently. That post-it note, like that could just be for anyone to enact any day of the week on any team. And it's just that idea of flipping your thinking or your view of how to present something is wonderful. You talk about how there are many, many, many bad designs out there. You speak about the world class COVID-19 app in your book, which I won't delve into too much because I don't want to upset people. But I wonder if you could tell us about a case of service design that had all of these beautiful ingredients of success that would be the top of this imaginary leaderboard that we might be talking about now.
It's such an interesting question, and sometimes I really hesitate with that, because I sometimes struggle to find really excellent examples right across the board. But there are pinnacles of excellence that are appearing, and there's certainly some companies who are doing some really interesting things to try and create a different dialogue with their customers, for example. It's always interesting to name names, and I'm not in the payment of anybody. I mean, I love people like an insurance company like Hiscox, who trust their customers. It's almost unheard of in the insurance world, you know. And yeah, they charge a bit more,
So
but
simple.
I know, it's extraordinary. Hey, you haven't got the receipt? Do you know what? We actually believe you did have that piece of jewelry, or whatever it is. And I find that attitude just so refreshing. Now, of course, we always end up talking about Apple. And I love talking about Apple because I knew Johnny Ive very well.
Mhm.
He used to work in a design company with me a long time ago, before becoming vastly more rich and famous than me. And but I think the redesigning of their thinking was absolutely fundamental. And the fact that they became the first $1 trillion company, not Microsoft, filled me with so much joy,
Yeah.
because they are human centered, whether it's, as Johnny goes on about, undoing the cable, or everything they've done about their products. You could argue their service is almost invisible, even not there. But then when you go into a store, you see that human aspect of their service as well. So they've been tremendous pioneers in service. And then the other great example, and it's a very digitally based example, but the way that government digital services um, completely changed the way government works, actually, and the way government delivers service to the UK, the citizens of the UK,
Yeah.
um, is an amazing achievement, and much copied around the world. I'm glad to see Germany
Yeah.
has. So there were some fantastic designers in UK government who went to Germany and are doing the same thing. They've just won an award. It's great. But
Wow.
just to explain what I mean, they took they took, I think, the top 20 things that people had to do with government, like get a passport, get a driving license, the kind of things you have to go to the post office to do and stuff like that. Uh, and on one side, they redesigned those completely for a digital world. So you didn't have to call up, didn't have to go somewhere. They had a fantastic set of principles, the number one of which was start with user needs. Though the original one said needs, and the management teams all thought that was their needs. I need it faster, I need it cheaper. And they said, no, no, not your needs, the citizens' needs. So they had to redress that. Anyway, but then you realize the impact of that on society. um, and they also went through every government department and said, you can't have your own logo, you can't have your own website. It's all going to be one,
Mm.
gov.uk. People need to find that and use it simply. Use the same font that Margaret Calvert designed for our motorway signage system. So there's this wonderful sort of link
Whoa.
through everything. I know, isn't it fantastic? But then, suddenly life is the problem with great service design is it sort of becomes invisible.
I was gonna. That's exactly what is in my head. But also, I'm like, because you mentioned invisibility with Apple, but I'm like, there's it becomes invisible, but then it also the great thing about it is the problems become invisible too. So
Yeah. And so sometimes we forget that they were ever there. So I think I've talked about this since I wrote the book, but the last election in the UK, there was a podcast talking about actually, the government have done some really great stuff, and getting a passport now is much easier, and getting a driving license, and we don't have to have silly little tear off stickers to put on our cars when we license them, and everything's, and now we've got NHS app, and in fact we're just about to get the government app, which is the last piece of this sort of digital service redesign. And they were saying, oh, the government's been really great. They did all this. It was not the government. It was designers. It was hardworking designers who transformed our relationship with government. The same in financial services. The revolution of design in our apps, in the way we interact and manage our lives. Convincing Barclays that it wasn't a product, it was a journey. So being Barclays, they went and counted them. There were 109 journeys and we had to design each one. But that's great. That's great. So you remove the problems, you take them away. Does that make happiness? People probably find something else to complain about. But but that has actually been an incredibly positive impact on life in a world where we constantly try and complain and find something else to worry about. Stand back, everybody. Stand back. I spoke to somebody yesterday who said, do you have any idea how good this stuff is in the UK compared to the rest of the world? Well, frankly, we don't, because we don't experience the rest of the world in that detail. But it has been brilliantly designed, unlike the COVID track and trace system that was a disaster, which you have to read about in the book.
exactly.
Everything else is actually rather brilliant.
It's wonderful in that idea. I almost though wish that we could have a hall of fame or the forgotten stories of the service designers that are behind all of these brilliant things. But you mentioned Barclays, and I've been looking at financial systems in this season and looking at banking, retail, and there's been some brilliant and I think about problem solving starting with some excellent questions first and foremost, and there's been some brilliant questions that guests have asked, like why are we still shopping on static sites, how can AI agents actually be used to humanize experiences and give back time to people to be more creative, like you've mentioned earlier, and what kind of positive change can happen if people just move slightly to purchasing from change brands such as Wild or Tony's Chocolonely, and looking at brands that exist that fix systems and not just sell products. Who is banking really built for? Again, you mentioned that at the top of this episode. And is it built on hype instead of helping minorities? With all that in mind, I'm wondering then, what emerging trends are you seeing in these sectors that you've been keeping a close eye on?
Yeah, wow, that's quite a big question. So, I mean, let's start with banking. I mean, I think the truth about banking is it's almost impossible to change it. I was part of a bank that had a very active incubator, accelerator, encouraging startups. But it absolutely fell at the last hurdle of actually integrating any of that into its
Mm,
systems and banking experience. And I look at Barclays now, and I don't see, when did I leave Barclays? 2015. My goodness, so was it that long ago? No, well, that's when I joined it. Sorry, 2019 I left, I think, and that was nothing's really changed. Actually, nothing's
yeah.
really changed. Um, though they're apparently building up their service design teams again, which is great, and I know other banks are doing that. So maybe things have changed, perhaps internally as well, if nothing else. But the truth is still, whether it's a bank, um, any kind of financial service, or a purpose-led chocolate bar or fashion brand, the only way it appears you can really do it is to rip everything up and start again, which is a bit tragic.
Mm,
And I love purpose-led companies. And the problem is, so many of them are startups. The last thing they think about is service design or customer experience. They're thinking about their big idea. They're thinking about their systems and their organizations. And yet those are the people I would most like to work with, but they never have time or money. Whereas the big people are constantly employing consultants to try and fix stuff that they never actually manage to change, in
yeah.
my perhaps slightly simplistic opinion, but certainly that's what I see. So I just kind of, again, I feel crises are coming, and
Yes.
new people are coming in. And when I worked at Orange, I still say Orange because it was owned by France Telecom, and I lived in France for a bit. So, but it's Orange in the UK, Anglophone countries. Um, but that was led by people who were really proud they could code. I thought, I'm sorry, that has no relevance to this role you are now in, right? You are responsible for millions of customers. They don't care if you can code. And there was a bit of that in banks as well. And I've recently been working with completely different industries, like fire and rescue services, which, most of the CEOs of the last 20, 30 years have just been firefighters who went up the scale. They didn't know about communities. They didn't know about how to be active in their town or city. Now there's a new breed coming through, and sometimes it just takes that amount of time for new purpose-led, post Apple, post Google young people who think completely differently to the people who originally hired them to get
Yeah.
into roles of leadership. And I do have a great hope for that, but it's a slow process. And one hopes they don't just go back to those bad behaviors of the leaders they're replacing, which you do see as well, I'm afraid. I have a very low opinion of leadership. I apologize. I
No,
want to see.
this is great because it's a great wake up. It is, and I think we need we need more of those conversations to happen, and it is an unraveling of norms that we've sat on and been comfortable with, and this is the whole purpose of this conversation. So I absolutely love that. And you mentioned those startups as well. We have a lot of startups who listen to this who've uh, just started their business in the middle and looking for tips and tricks. And I, again, would implore you to buy the book. If you have a small budget that you can't take a team in, buy the book.
I hope there's something in there that will make people think differently, as the title says. And I hope it's designed to be pragmatic and useful. And it comes from the training I've been doing for 6, 7 years, right back to the exec ed, the executive education at the Royal College of Art. We suddenly realised that non-designers had an appetite for this, and when you took them through these tools, they had epiphanies, and it was literally life changing. They would do things differently. So that, I've tried to bottle that in the book if I can.
That's beautiful. Clive, I want to say thank you so much for your time today. And I'd like to finish this out with a question I ask everyone as well is what advice, one piece of advice that you'd like to give to your future self?
Well, I think over my life, I've sometimes been frustrated with people who don't agree with me. And, my past wish is that I would have worked harder to understand I'm more patient now. I'm more forgiving. I'm more tolerant. And that's helped me take people on a journey. Whereas a lot of young people, and certainly the young me, were frustrated and said, "Why can't you see it my way?" The truth is, the world doesn't. And my future advice is to carry on being more tolerant, more empathetic. I learnt a lot through Project Love, if I'm honest, how to befriend your enemy, how to get one on one with them and try and come to a better place together. That would be the advice I'd give myself in my future, what's left of it.
There's plenty left. Thank you, Clive. It was wonderful to talk to you. I really appreciate your time, and from all of us listening as well. It has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for writing your book. Thanks for all that you do. And thank you for spending your time with us today.
Thank you so much for asking me. I really loved it every second. Thanks so much.